require the mess.
Sorry.
Says you've oh, got it. It says you've disabled it.
Okay. Let me see what I can do there. Hold on a second.
While we wait, I mean, I have some comments that don't really require looking at a map. If that's okay to dive right in.
Sure.
So if we're preparing, I don't know if we're planning to like prepare a report to the larger board, I guess, on this. You know, there were a few things I'd like to take into consideration, and I'll start off with something complimentary so I don't sound grumpy with the other things. You know, I do think the amount of comments they got that they tried to incorporate, you know, whether we agree with them or not, just acknowledging that that was a huge undertaking, and it seemed like they've tried to do this in a thoughtful manner. So I just like to put that out there as a more positive comment. But my thing that I think we all need to think about is what is the ultimate staffing for this, and not even getting to the point of expansion. It's just there's a lot of ducks that have to get lined up in a row to make such a change happen. You know, we've seen just in our town where we have limited service, you know, just in a couple block area where bus stops were moved, it took over 1.5 years to get that so that everything lined up, where the announcements on the bus lined up with where it said the bus stop was online, and actually getting the right signs in the right place. So this is such a large undertaking. I really want to make sure they have the staffing so that when they roll this out, it is done well. And then related to that staffing is also just the outreach. You know, a lot of people will be attuned to this. They have the apps they get notices on, but some people won't. So making sure we understand what the outreach is, particularly for our most vulnerable that may not always have access to some of the other means of knowing about that. And then related then to the staffing is also when we get down to the expansion, you know, when they say they're going to enhance services, like what is the funding for that and the ultimate plan for that. I had one more thing, but I will, it's maybe a little more out there from what everyone else will say, so I'll hold back and say it if we have time. Thanks.
Sounds good. Thank you. David.
Okay. So I just think we're in a really difficult spot right now to decide whether we're supporting or, you know, opposing this very significant change. Nobody's really even seen the full proposal. A couple of us have. And honestly, I just don't think that there's been enough, at least internally or overall, discussion about this proposal. Honestly, I think we spend more time talking about whether to put a stop sign in somewhere than we've talked about this. And I remember in the past, you know, rooms filled with people talking about a fare increase or sort of a modest bus, you know, change, but nothing like this has happened this time. And I think part of it is because it's just hard to understand, right? It takes a lot of time to absorb all of this to decide whether it's a benefit or not. And so in Newton, I think we're sort of lukewarm overall. Some things seem to be beneficial, like a new bus route that goes to Waltham. If anyone's going to want to take that, I don't know. But other things I think are really terrible, like the total decimation of our entire express bus route network into Boston. The whole north side of Newton is impacted. So I think it's hard to decide how to respond because the express routes were so full before the pandemic, right? But then they were changed significantly during the pandemic. They were never put back, and now it's cut back even more. So it's all about trade-offs, right? And we're definitely trading off this really convenient one-seat ride in from some different places in Newton into the financial district for, you know, something that's more streamlined and maybe operates more, you know, at a more regularly during the day. But, you know, who knows? Who really knows exactly if this new route system is going to generate more ridership than was the case before. So I think really the challenge for us is about the timing, right? So we did meet with the T service planners when they presented the first proposal, and they were great. They did make a bunch of changes that we recommended, which have been very good, I think. But I think that we're still on the fence because we met with them again just this week, and they seem open to listening to us, but they can't really say one way or the other if any of the additional changes that we made um, can be implemented. So we're sort of like trying to get over the midline, right? To decide whether or not we should be opposing these changes. And it's just really problematic, I think, because the public hasn't even seen the revised proposal, which is really different from the original one, right? So I guess if we could advocate for just a little more time, maybe. They're definitely rushing this through for obvious reasons. But if we could have more time to hear from the service planners about the most recent set of comments and to hear, from the public, I just think that that would be really helpful. So I guess that's my recommendation.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. And one thing I was thinking of while you were talking, David, and I think this sort of speaks to some things that you were saying is, I think there's a world where maybe we could express sort of some positive points and some areas of, I'm going to say, negatives or concerns at the same time without having to write like a letter that says we fully support or we fully oppose this, because I think there's probably some things in this program that we all like a lot. But then to Susan's point, I think a lot of this is going to be contingent on the staffing, the outreach, and getting the right framework into place to actually make this a success. So I think there's many more steps that need to happen before we can say this definitively is green lighted to go, or we feel like this is green lighted to go. Leonard.
Yeah, I do want to say something about. I'd like to maybe get some clarity from David. So I was kind of getting it towards the end. Because I see that there was lots of potential for feedback, or input from the public, when they presented the draft. But I guess your sense is that we need another round, of public feedback, and so now I'm going to support moving forward at the current rate. But in your ideal world, your preferred world, David, would you prefer to have like a second round of feedback? So they print a draft, we get feedback, they do this next version, we do feedback, and then would that be it? Because at some point we have to stop the feedback process, right, and decide that we're going to make a decision.
So Leonard, they did have a lot of meetings.
Yeah.
They had one meeting in our case that had Waltham and Newton and Dedham and Needham all together in one meeting, and I feel like the whole first half at least was just them presenting the plan. And then if I remember, we just had breakout rooms, so you went to a breakout room and you didn't hear what everybody else said, and then they ran out of time and ended it. So that was the one chance. It seems like, I don't know, I wish there was a way for more people to be paying attention. I think that they tried. They did have a lot of meetings, but even locally, I just feel like there's not much feedback.
No, your feelings. So I'm just trying to understand what the objective was in trying to, if we were going to propose the weighting, then what would be the solution? Because what I would like us to do is to propose solutions for moving forward with whatever process we determine is best. So in the case of what Susan has proposed is or told us are her issues, I would say the solution to that is that they roll it out more slowly. And we do understand that mean, there are elements of this that aren't going to be rolled out for like 4 or 5 years. And so we could say in the early years, I mean, you maybe go even more slowly than you might right now intend to do so, until we are confident that we have the staff. And I think that would also allow us to revise elements of it, that people do have problems with, and allow for more time for public input. So I mean, I understand why you want to move forward. And I would really hate to break that momentum, because I'm concerned that if we break it, we probably won't get it back, just because of external circumstances that always have a way of making plans, well, hurting plans. Sorry, ran out of words there, but I think I made a point. I'll stop. Thank you.
No, I appreciate that, Len. So just, I think I sort of got your sentiment. I just want to make sure I captured it correctly in the notes. Building on Susan's point about outreach, it feels like what you're saying is that there should be sort of feedback throughout any potential implementation process, so that as we're sort of moving into that implementation phase, the T is hearing about what's working, what's not working, what needs are still on the table from certain communities. Did I sort of capture that?
Yes, it does.
Sentiment? Okay.
Yeah, no, that's very nice. Thank you.
Thank you. Alan, I think you were next.
Yeah. I've been involved with the MBTA a long time. Some of you know me from my years at the MBTA, and involved in big service changes, but nothing to this extent. They're taking a look at the entire bus network. A lot of credit goes to it. It's a huge undertaking. And the public process, as Susan mentioned, and others, have been very fruitful, and they've been listening. But I've worked, my work at the T and some smaller programs, as well as I've been a transit consultant for the last 15 years, 16 years since I retired at T, and working elsewhere on similar type of efforts. They probably do need another round of public meetings, because they've made so many changes, listening to the public. And at the end, at a minimum, they're going to need public hearings before it could be approved by the board. That was always in their in the T's policies. So they need to get back out. They talk about the LMA, Kendall Square, and the Seaport is 3 growing areas, a lot of travel. Yes, for sure. Seaport is probably the newest of the 3, along with medical area, with always high priority at the T to try to provide better service. But I'm concerned, and I'm glad they made so many reversals on their plans, but some of the things didn't make sense to me, and I didn't look at it too carefully. I didn't want to be in a position, as I said to Brian at the beginning of the meeting, to be, he's old school and he doesn't know anything anymore, and he shouldn't be criticizing them, because they did a lot of good work. And I would like to hear from each community what they think about the changes in their communities, because my knowledge of what's going on in the streets in Newton and Lexington and elsewhere is rusty. I haven't dealt with it that directly in 16 years, except through meetings at the advisory board. So I would like to hear what you all have to say. I'm concerned, they use the streetlight data, I think, as their base to get a sense of traffic flow. But that's mostly people driving cars. And so they're immediately taking that data and say, but if we can set up a bus route that follows these flows, some number of people will transfer. Now, maybe so, but I think a lot of people who, most people try to live in locations that are convenient to their work, not that everybody can pick places that would be so convenient. So I'm a little concerned with the use of the streetlight data. I would like to hear more and how they're projecting the ridership changes through that data source. And I'll leave it for there for now. I'd like to hear from the other cities and towns, from Medford and Lexington, Newton, whoever else is here. What you think about things. Things have changed in the 16 years since I've been away from T, and I've seen it. I've kept abreast some, but again, I'd like to hear from the local communities.
And I think, and I could be wrong, but just to get to the streetlight data point, I believe the streetlight data is used as a part of the overall picture. So that's not the exclusive thing that they're looking at. They're looking at ridership. They're looking at potential growth forecasts. I know they came to the city of Boston and took a lot of information from us around future growth projections. So I think it was one piece of that. But to your point, I remember kind of interestingly, they showed what the streetlight data told them in terms of what would make for a good bus network. And one showed a high frequency route along Granite Avenue in Milton, which sure enough, it's parallels 93. That's why there was a sort of need to have a high frequency route there, not necessarily because
It's
of existing
commuters.
bus ridership.
Yeah, it's commuters coming in from the south, just
So I think-
bypassing the expressway, including me. I'll use Granite Street.
Exactly. So, so I think what they've done since then is they've looked at the data and fine tuned it to where they see current travel flows. That's my understanding. I'm not a data expert though.
My initial look at it, a couple of months ago, it looked like they were creating a lot of transfers. And I'm glad people, it seems like a lot of riders and local officials pointed that out, and they changed a lot of them. I won't give you any examples, but one of the things I always tried to do was look to see where the transfers were and then restructure routes to minimize or eliminate the number of transfers. And they seem to be going the other way in some places. And I haven't had the opportunity, like folks in the communities, to sit down with the service planners and hear why they made these recommendations. And I think I said it in the meeting, Houston, everybody seems to use as an illustration. I mean, Houston street network is quite different than the Boston region, number one. Two, that Houston went into it saying we can create more high frequency routes, get rid of a lot of wiggles, a lot of unproductive routes, and we can do this cost neutral and we'll gain a lot of ridership. Well, in the end, they heard from all these people, their loyal long-term riders who lost connections and even lost service, and ended up restoring it. And so it became costly. It wasn't a cost neutral situation in the end. And the same thing happened in Baltimore and a few other places. So it's good to look at it, and what they did is fine, but you gotta be careful.
Great, thank you, Alan. So Jay, I think you're the next stand.
Yeah, and I think I agree with everything folks have been saying. I'll add Everett's sort of color to this. So to David's point about the outreach, I think from our perspective, on the one hand, they've been very responsive to the city's comments. The second version of the map that I saw, I think, was very responsive to what we had to say, which was really a reflection of what our residents were saying that were concerned. But the position I'm in now is that map is not public. So I still have residents coming to me and saying, thinking that their service is being cut or being reduced or being changed. And I know that's not true, but I can't really tell them it's not true because the T isn't coming forward quick enough to really show that to folks. So I hope they get out there soon. I hope they sort of, I think what they're doing in Everett is great. I agree with 80–90% of it. But I wish there would be a little more, and transparent is not the right word, just more active and show they're being responsive. They're being responsive, but it's not publicly yet. So that's sort of my ask. I think from a timeline perspective, my worry is that like any change, there's always going to be folks who don't like it, who push back, who get noisy and angry. And looking at the way they plan to roll this out, which is over a period of say 5 years and doing a couple of changes every year. If it's not successful in the first year, they won't get to year 2, 3, 4, or 5. They've got to make this work year one, or they've got to make all the changes at once. Because I think in order for this network to work, you need all the changes. I think they haven't really figured out yet kind of what step 1, 2, and 3 is, and whether those sort of interim steps keep the network fluid and viable. So I want to hear more about that. I do worry that, they might get a year or two into this and have to stop because, there's some amount of public pushback. And to Alan's point about the transfers, I think it's a good point. They are inducing a few more transfers that are a little bit questionable. That I think, in the Houston model, the logic was, well, if we run the buses frequently enough and they come every 4 or 5 minutes, then transfer is not a big deal. But when you look at the T's maps and they're saying that the highest frequency routes run every 15 minutes or less. Well, 15 minutes, let's say it's 15 minutes, transfer on a service that's running every 15 minutes now is sort of a bigger deal. And so I just want to, and I've spoken to them about this, I think we want to see more detail about what these headways are on these individual routes. We're obviously happy that we're getting a lot more routes that are high frequency than we have today. But 15 minutes isn't really that great. So I think we want to see a little more there. That's all I got. Thanks.
Sorry, great, thank you. So I saw some hands before Brian, but Brian is the next hand who hasn't gone yet. So I want to open up to folks who haven't had a chance to speak yet. Brian, do you want to talk?
I think Suzanne was ahead of me, Matt.
Oh, sorry about that. My apologies, Suzanne. from
Oh,
Cambridge.
thank you. So I just wanted to echo a lot of what Jay just said, which is it's really difficult right now with having this information, but not really being able to share it. And so, for example, in Cambridge, the response, the changes have also been very positive. It's a much better proposal than it was, but there are still some things that are highly problematic or could be cause a big backlash on council among the community, and we can't really put it out there because you can't talk to city councilors unless it's a public meeting. So that's really a challenge. And then I just wanted to note that the non-connection between Chelsea and Kendall Square / Cambridge is still very surprising, and it's been pushed a lot from a lot of directions, but it's not making it onto anywhere. It's not making it onto the Silver Line, or at least not in the most direct way, and it's not making it into here. And then finally, just as Jay said, how is it actually going to roll out? Because I think when you look at it, you're like, oh, okay, well, this all is happening, but then it may not be happening, or may only be happening over a very long time. So the lack of understanding of how it exactly is going to roll out is, I think, also an issue. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Susan. So let's see. I think
So, yeah, Matt, I can go now
Please.
if you're
Yeah,
ready.
yeah.
I guess just trying to synthesize what I'm hearing from folks, and I know, Matt, you're taking notes as well. Thank you for that. I guess there's a couple of things that I'm hearing for themes, and this is really helpful to me because I got to try to make this into a document. I guess there's a concern about process, and when I hear process, what I'm hearing is there's definitely a need for the full proposals, the full timeline, the full plan, so that we can really be responding to a fully baked proposal, which right now it seems like it's sort of half-baked. And then I'm also hearing implementation concerns, and this is really where I have the biggest concerns. They don't have the operators to run the current system. They don't have the fleet to run the current system. They don't have the facilities to run the current system. And they don't have the dispatchers and the bus OCC to run the current system. So how can we do a 25% capacity increase without that? And I guess the concern I have is that the timeline that they're operating under is, they're trying to get this approved before the next administration takes office. And that's an artificial timeline. I mean, I get why they're doing it, but from our perspective, I don't think there's anything wrong with asking them to slow down. And I also think there's nothing wrong with sort of asking or inquiring if an approval in November of 2022 by this board doesn't necessarily mean approval for everything in the plan for the next 5 years. I think it's important that we understand what the implementation timeline is, what has to be achieved before that, and then that they come back to the board and they come back to the communities and sort of say, okay, this is phase 3, this is phase 4, this is phase 5. What we don't want is an approval in November of 2022 as the Baker administration's walking out the door. And then, in 2027, they say, oh no, we have authority to do this. And so I guess just what I'm hearing is some stuff that we can sort of ask the board to slow down on. And I'm just curious if folks sort of think that makes sense or if that's a direction you want to head in.
Brian, maybe another way to frame that could be conditional approval pending a number of things getting resolved or worked out. So I think to your point, the conditional approval of a map with routes, but then also conditional upon the MBTA coming up with a implementation timeline and a capital funding stream and an operating plan for how that actually rolls out. Cool. So Todd, you haven't spoken yet. I might call on you next.
Thanks. Can you hear me? Hello?
Todd, we can hear you.
All right. Yeah, I could probably go on for like hours on this topic. I'm trying to catch up on. Alan brought up some good points. Brian, Jay, Suzanne, everybody did. So yeah, I think like Suzanne said, we all, I think as everyone said, we all in this room want improvements and we support transit as a mode. But obviously the concerns that Brian just mentioned with operators and then funding, how realistic is this? And then in terms of the proposals of the original BNR versus existing, there were many issues with Medford's system as proposed. They have revised a lot of it, listened to us, so they did a decent job, probably better than I expected revising it, but there's still some routes, kind of as Suzanne touched upon, where they still may be tough to swallow for the community or council, whomever, like routes that were already gone during the pandemic that they claimed would be back, and it was only because of operators and not money, and now, lo and behold, they knew they were always going to propose them to be removed as part of this. So like there's a lot of good elements, but there's still those tough ones where I go back to something we mentioned in our comment letter, is it would be much easier to swallow for, for most everyone, I think, if it was just the adds of 25% versus the reductions. Is when you get into those choices between neighborhood versus neighborhood, it really gets tough. But that doesn't mean abandon everything. So implementation wise, it seems like I've heard recently that they said they counted on transit priority in the cities and towns, which that means if there is any issues with individual routes being lost and things like that on a local level, that could end up impacting approvals, what they're assuming baked in for transit priority on certain roads, right? Because they may need improvements from or approvals from local entities. And then money to do all that, all of us cities and towns, most of us struggle with money to do improvements on streets. So is that part of the 25%? I think Alan and I probably have inside information because we work there, but so it seems like this is like the high level planning level. So for people who are asking, what will the actual headways be, Jay and others, like they likely didn't get into that level yet, because so then it goes to, deeper into planning with scheduling and the operators and see what actually works with the system in the garages. and they likely did not even approach that yet. And then as Brian said, all the facilities can't manage what we have now. So this plan is rolled out, you know, mostly as an off-peak and weekend plan, which is what they've been trying to do for the last 10 plus years, because they never have anything to add during the rush hours because of the facilities and number of buses. So it's like, I don't know, we should definitely try to move forward, but there's definitely issues. It seems very compressed. They started off with, what, 6 months of the generic binary questions in the survey, A or B, which were kind of led to the way they wanted to go. And then they went out with the specifics later. And then now they're leaving like such a compressed amount of time for the communities to absorb it, and the elected officials and others to really get a true sense of what our community, if we do support it or not, it's challenging. So, sorry, I could go on more.
No, understood. There's a lot to unpack here. Thank you, Todd. So Susan Barrett, I think you were the next one.
Yes, so a couple things. So in regards to the process, because people are saying, well, there needs to be, you know, more outreach. And while I definitely think as through this whole process, making sure our most vulnerable are also where the changes is important. I wanted to remind people, like, some of us have been invited, you know, the municipalities are going to see this. I think it's all this week. I know our town's meeting with the MBTA is tomorrow. They did mention that we were all getting a preview. It goes out publicly this week. And then there is that public outreach. And then they said going before the board in December. So I think, I don't know, I was a little unclear if people were aware of all that. But then one thing that's coming to mind, this was my fourth point before that I refrained on making, and we've said this in other forums, is, you know, maybe we do have to have included here, what is the purpose that everyone sees for the MBTA? Because someone had mentioned, you know, a loss of express buses, you know, for people like going into the financial district. So, you know, some people say, well, you know, we can't really put all our, you know, design a transit system around people that now have more choices, you know, to work from home. So we really have to focus on, you know, seniors, people with disabilities, low income people, and youth. So we should really find out, is it to get people who have choices out of cars and onto the MBTA? Is it for everybody? You know, who is it ultimately for? Maybe that needs to be spelled out so that we make sure this meets that. And if it is for, you know, those that don't tend to have as many choices, which includes youth, one of the things I'm curious about is what is their feeling around serving like older youth who may take the service just to and from school. Some communities, Arlington, for example, their buses are packed in the morning. I'm always so impressed with middle school students, high school students. And the bonus to that community is you get the ridership, right? And with more ridership, there's less excuse to cut back on service. Their community gets to save money on school busing. So I think we have to look at this, because especially when you get out into the outer core where we have less service, we're spending millions of dollars on school buses. And not that I want to just unload a bunch of students onto the MBTA and get them to pay the bill, but what's that partnership? How can we be looking at this more holistically? But that ultimately depends on, you know, I think there needs to be, someone needs to state, well, this is what the ultimate purpose, you know, of the MBTA is, and then we make sure we're driving towards that purpose. That's it. Thank you.
Suzanne, I would just add that the reason Arlington is so successful is it's the chair of its select board. Absolutely.
If only, Brian, if only. But we'll touch on that. If I get
All you, Len. It's all you.
If I get a chance to make another comment, you know.
And yeah, Len, I think you were next up.
Well, actually, I think David's next. You know,
David.
so,
Okay, so
yeah.
David, then Len, you're on deck.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, good, thanks. So, I mean, there's just a lot of agreement among this group. I think it's great. There's not always so much agreement. I agree with what everybody has been saying, and I agree with what Alan said before when you made the comment about the connections and making people walk longer or transfer somewhere, just to think about that you are, I mean, it is making it harder for some people. But what I was trying to say before is that again, the service planners did listen to us. They listened to our comments from the first round, and they definitely made some good changes. I think that I'm just maybe asking for a little bit more time here, because we really want to see if the additional changes that we just talked about these additional changes with the service planners on Monday, and we didn't get to see the proposal until the actual meeting that we had with the service planners. So we just want to see, could these additional changes be made or not? Because we are just right on the edge, I think. And I mean, maybe it seems like small little potatoes to the MBTA, just these couple little changes in Newton compared to all the other service in the whole region, but it makes a very big difference to us in terms of, do we support it or not, and how much, right? So, and maybe there still is going to be some public feedback or city council feedback, probably, once they get a chance to see the final proposal. They've sort of characterized this as being the final proposal that they're going to be letting people know about, right? That was a question I had asked previously. So I guess the question is, when do we need to take a position here? How much time do we have to sort of let them respond to us and to other communities? So that's one question. And by the way, I do think all along there's maybe been a little bit too much focus on transit priority. They talk about that a lot. And so I just kind of feel like, yeah, I mean, sometimes it depends. It completely depends. Sometimes maybe it's not needed. And, in plenty of corridors, maybe it's not needed or desirable at all. It definitely helps in some places, but they've talked about that, quite a bit through this whole process, maybe a little bit too much.
Yeah. What's up?
Great, thank you, David.
Oh,
So I
think
want
so.
to leave a
We need to keep
little,
it quick.
oh,
One
sorry,
second.
Jay, I'm gonna mute you, if that's okay. So I think we heard a lot. I think we've also had a chance to speak at this point. If it's okay, maybe Brian, we could suggest next steps for this. And I think next step is,
So, yeah, Matt, let me just run over the timeline as I understand it, and then I think that'll inform. So the Bus Network Redesign Task Force, which is a group of advocates, is meeting tomorrow, and the maps are supposed to get shown then. There is going to also be a presentation on the 27th, which is 2 days from now, to the Board of Directors, the T Board of Directors, which is sort of the preview. CTPS has the proposal right now and is doing the equity analysis. I've spoken to them, and that will be done in advance of November 17th MBTA Board of Directors meeting, which is where they are being requested to do a final approval of bus network redesign. The advisory board is meeting on November 15th, which is 2 days before. And so to answer your question, David, this committee, I would hope, would be in a position to deliver its recommendations for that meeting, for the 15th. So what I'm sort of need from this group is, direction, and I've gotten a lot of it today, and I appreciate that. And also, I will be sort of writing a first draft with all of you, and with Matt especially. And we're going to have to come back and get your takes on that. So I do think we will need to meet at least 2 more times, certainly once a couple days before the 15th, that we can vote to approve something to send out to the full board. And then Matt or someone from this committee should present that on the 15th. And then, in the meantime, just looking for folks to share with me their thoughts, their hard, bright lines or whatever. Because I never want to get ahead of the organization. I have my own thoughts on this whole process, but I'm here to represent you folks. So so let me know. And then the other thing, I guess, is I think it is okay for the advisory board to say sort of what Matt was hinting at earlier, which is we conditionally support this in theory. We have lots of questions about the details, and we want more details at a micro root level, and we want folks to come back to us. Don't take this approval today as carte blanche for the next 5 years, boss folks. You know, let us know what you're going to do. Thank you.
Well, it sounds good to me, Brian. So just, I don't want to run out of time before we get to this logistical point, but do we want to try and find another time to meet with this group? Maybe, Brian, to your point, we'll have drafted a letter, given folks a few days to review, and then maybe meet to discuss that draft letter.
Yeah, we can absolutely do that, Matt. We have 21 days from today. Well, actually, no, sorry. Yeah, 20 days. So we should probably plan for something late next week if that's possible. And by then, we'll try to have a rough draft for folks to respond to. Next week is tough. There's an MPO meeting on the Thursday, the 3rd. But again, you know, I'm available at your pleasure.
So I'll throw a timeout to folks. I know this is always difficult to plan a meeting by committee, but we'll try it here. What about Friday the 4th, either at 10 a.m. or 11 a.m.?
I think that'll work for me. Either time. I'm just checking the date.
I'm good Friday morning next week, either time.
Friday does not work for Jay.
Sorry, just heard two people talking. Amira, what'd you say? Sorry.
Friday does not work for Jay.
Okay.
I can't make it either. It's possible I could send Andy Reeker, but I don't know. But neither of those work for me.
What about Thursday the 3rd in the afternoon? I know the MPO is in the morning, but maybe if we aim for the afternoon, that might work. Either 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock.
I'll do my best. It'll depend on what kind of work I have, because kind of like half my work day, you know, goes to an MPO meeting in the morning. So if I have the bandwidth meeting at work, I'll do it. But don't hold it up for me. You know, so if you need a quorum, you know, I'll pop in, you know, get your quorum, you know, and probably do my work. I mean, I'll half listening, you know.
Understood.
Sure.
All right. So if let's try and aim for Thursday the 3rd at 2 p.m. then. And Brian, do you mind sending out that meeting invite? Perfect.
Brian, oh gosh, you know, I think that is also the day that we have a UPWP meeting, you know, on that day with MPO.
We have a ANF meeting.
I think we have like a UPWP meeting.
There is a UPWP meeting at 1.
Yeah.
All 3 meetings. ANF, Boston Region MPO, and UPWP at 1.
Yeah, that's like my whole day. Yeah. Well, yeah, I'll be happy paying attention, Brian, Matt. So it's like I'll be there. Yeah. So.
Hopefully by then we'll have at least an outline for folks to respond to with sort of a broad brushstrokes position, or at least, you know, some kind of a stake in the ground for folks to respond.
I mean, I'll get you a quorum if you need it. If you don't need me for a quorum, then and I can just read stuff. I mean, so it's not critical that one. Do not hold this up for one person, especially if you have a quorum.
Your attendance is worth 4 people. So
you have a quorum, you're all set. I'll get your quorum, okay? You know.
Yeah, we could sit at one table. That's a good point, Todd. Let's move mass conference. Or moving the other, I think it's called. So I want to spend a few minutes at the end of the meeting, though, talking about one other topic, or perhaps a range of topics, which are other items that this committee might want to cover over the next 10 to 12 months. So Susan, I think you were the one who flagged this at the last meeting, and you know, I think it'd be good for us to think, you know, holistically? Like, are there other major topics we want to talk about that we want the MBTA to either send representatives to us, or talk with other cities and towns about, or specific issues that are affecting us at the individual municipal level? So, Susan, do you want to maybe mention the item you had brought up last time? And
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. I was hoping we could talk about paratransit. It's not rapid, but that does fall under our committee, as I understand. There's been changes, but also there's been talk about should the ADA paratransit really be more of a state responsibility? And since the state does run a variety of demand transportation, and funding for other demand transportation, I think it would be interesting to look at that. So I'd like to understand that. And then just more of what's going on with the, sorry, getting a call here, with paratransit. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Susan. All right, so, and consider this like a brainstorm session. So if there are other topics that folks want to talk about, whether it's staffing levels at the MBTA Operations Center, which I think are incredibly important, and it would be good to understand what their plan is. So I'll actually throw that out as one of my own, or issues that are affecting your community.
So, Matt, I've got several ideas, in addition to paratransit, which I completely agree with, and actually think I'm going to have some outside research done on that topic. Slow zones on heavy rail, what's going on with CRRC, which is the builder of the red and orange line cars. Also, what's the plan for phase 2, which is implementing the signal changes necessary to make the new red and orange line cars function the way that everybody wants them to, with 90-second headways. That's going to take a lot of work underground, and what's the plan for that? Sort of holistically looking at transit signal prioritization and bus lanes. Lots of communities have done them, but there doesn't seem to be a holistic approach or a funding source. Chapter 90 is not growing, so we need to kind of, if there's something we could do around that. State of the Blue Line, Green Line transformation updates. I know Brookline and Newton and Boston hear about that, but it affects lots of other people. What you said, Matt, OCC, bus OCC, signal dispatch staffing. What's the plan? In terms of hiring, is there anything happening with quality of life issues affecting operators? Things like movement on split shifts, any of that stuff to make it more attractive to be a bus operator and not have to kind of, work 12 hours a day, but only get paid for 4 of them because you're doing a split shift. And I can keep going. So it's really up to the committee about what folks are interested in hearing. I love this stuff, and I'm happy to do this once a week, but I know people can't do that. So, let me know.
So that's actually another good question, which is, what should the cadence of this committee be? My initial thought is once a month, but I don't know, Brian, did you have another thought on that timeline, or do other folks have thoughts on that timeline? Once a month with whatever supplemental needs we need to have. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we could do this quarterly, we can do this monthly, we can do, like I said, we can do this weekly. It's up to you folks. I mean, I love this stuff. So,
I'm totally with you on it. I would love for it to be weekly too. I know our calendars sometimes get in the way, but I love this stuff. This is really cool.
I love it too. I would say, we're a small enough group that I think we can make an hour meeting work. Maybe an hour and a half is too long, so maybe like 75 minutes. Could be a good chunk. And if we don't use all the time, we don't use all the time. I mean, we have a lot more time allotted to our advisory council meetings, and if we don't use it all, it's fine. People get time back, but at least we have that option. So once a month we could work. every 6 to 8 weeks, or maybe once a month, and maybe take a break every now and then for some reason that's not working for people on a given month. Whatever.
So Matt, why don't you and I and Amira work together? We'll try to come up with a monthly cadence that works. We know there are some topics that are coming up that this committee will be asked to weigh in around the operating budget and the capital budget in the spring. So we can kind of slot those in and work backwards. And then maybe when we meet on the 3rd, we can sort of have that to share. That works for you.
Yeah, it sounds great.
Okay.
All right, guys, any other topics that folks want to cover? And this is not the end to this list. Feel free to, if you think of something in a dream later tonight, feel free to reach out. Happy to include it later as well.
Todd did add another possible topic, Green Line to Route 16.
Oh.
If we want to add that on there.
So I think that's actually another really interesting topic is under the, I'm going to say previous administrations, there's always sort of a general thought about where expansion was going to go. And maybe this isn't the right time for MBTA to do expansion, but maybe it's also worth thinking, what are the next projects that from a rapid transit perspective, we would want to think through. So always on the table is the red blue connector, which I know would be really helpful for Revere, Boston, even Cambridge for that connection to Kendall. But are there other projects that we would want to think about including in the list?
Silver Line.
So Silver Line, of course.
Yeah. So I think it's a good point, Matt. I don't think the T is going to be going out of their way to think of new projects, and yet we have all this federal funding potentially that is in the wings, and I think it might be incumbent on us to form a little bit of a political alliance here to maybe have some discussions about these topics and maybe push the T a little bit to, or find out what the right partnerships are to access that money to then push the T in the direction we'd like to see it go.
Love it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, I know we have a new administration coming on in January. I mean, are there in the next few weeks or months, maybe some priorities we would want to think through? And Brian, feel free to shoot this down, but priorities this committee would want to think through for that new administration, whether it's on operating, capital, or sort of other key topics.
I would actually put commuter rail transformation or regional rail on this because, Kim Driscoll, who's likely going to be our next lieutenant governor, is a huge fan of this, and it might be a good place to collaborate on.
Yeah, I mean, I would say let's try and build a solid relationship with her. I mean, maybe to the extent that she's willing to meet with us. I mean,
I guess the other thing would be, sorry, Len.
That's okay.
Just general municipal outreach. Like, I know Matt, you talk to folks all the time. Jay, I'm sure you do as well, but not everybody has that. So if they could just get better, or at least have a process to talk to people, it would be really helpful.
Well, try and utilize the MBTA caucus, and utilize those folks to then make outreach to the communities that they represent.
So Matt Moran, when you're the TGM, just make a note of all this stuff, okay? And let us know. Okay?
Got to keep the good people out of that position.
I was
Can I
going to
add
say,
one thought to this list?
I was going to say, Brian, are you wishing me poor health and well-being?
Since I've
Sorry,
left, the hair is getting a lot less gray. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, just one thought to this list. When you're talking about they haven't worked through the details, include on that, they really kind of project their performance indicators, things like cost per rider, cost per hour, not cost per hour, cost per rider, things of that nature, the performance indicators, because they're talking about, improving the frequency of service, particularly in the off-peak hours when ridership is already relatively low, or had been traditionally. Things are changing a little bit since COVID. But if they add too much service elasticities are going to suggest that it's going to encourage ridership, because you run it more frequent, you're gonna get more riders. But it's gonna probably degrade the cost per rider for that route. The performance, the productivity of that route will go down. And so there's a huge impact, potentially a huge impact on budgets.
Absolutely. Yeah, and Alan, I would even just add to that, what is the ridership goal?
Yeah, good point. Basic.
Is there one?
Is there one? I think they tend to exaggerate a lot of their projections that I've seen and a lot of information.
Yeah, Alan,
I
this
think your hearts are in a good place, but they tend to exaggerate.
yeah, this may be something you experienced, Alan. While I was there, even though the tools have changed in previous service planning efforts, at each individual route or community level, they have a projection for riders gained and lost, and they're only showing us the net for each community and the net overall, but they're not sharing with us like that level of detail.
Yeah.
Which I said we'd love to have all of us, and I think the rest of you professionals in the room, you know, you don't necessarily have to share with the public per se, but it seems like the presentation materials were very kind of, for lack of a better term, dumbed down to like basic categories.
At least when they're talking to the community, they should be providing that detail to each community.
Yes. Bring back the blue book.
Yeah, my blue book.
Well, on a closing note, let me just put in a plug for what Susan said at the very end. I support it wholeheartedly, you know, so maybe something in the water up here. Yeah.
So
It seems like if they're talking about going to the board by November 17th for some sort of blessing, they don't have time for a true public hearing process.
Nope.
And that's going to be a mistake.
Yeah, so it's almost encouraging people that may have not had enough time to absorb or concerned to show up at the MBTA board meeting itself, which could be something to watch. But most of the T meetings that they've been holding, they take up 55 of 60 minutes on presentation, leave 5 minutes for generic, and it doesn't leave a lot of room for these detailed city by city comments. So
makes sense. So I want to be cognizant of time. I have to run to another meeting. Are there any closing thoughts or comments that folks have? All right. Well, really appreciate your time today, everyone. Thank you so much. Brian, thank you for organizing today. And we'll look forward to meeting next week when we can start to review our comments on Bus Network Redesign further.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good one.
Bye.